Hi, my name is Stu Boehmig, and I've spent most of my life helping people understand all of life from God's perspective. And today I want us to take a look at the tyrannizing, debilitating power of fear in our lives. Today I want us to talk about the source and the root of fear. Where does it ultimately really come from? Why is it so disabling to us? And then in the next session, we'll talk about how to overcome that fear in our lives. But first of all, we have to understand where it comes from. I remember when I was a very young child, my grandfather, and I loved my grandfather. My grandfather took me to an amusement park, and we spent most of the morning riding in the Kittyland areas of the park. And then after lunch, he said, I want us to go into Noah's Ark. And I could see Noah's Ark. It was this great, huge ship, an orange ship, and it was rocking backwards and forward. It was huge. And I said, well, what's inside Noah's Ark? And he said, well, it's kind of a fun place. It's a haunted house. And crazy things happened there, and I wasn't too sure about that. But I said, okay, I'll go with you. And he had no intentions of any problems with me or things that could happen. And so we gave the man, tore off our little tickets. You know how you do that, and we entered this doorway. And I remember moving from the sunlight into complete, utter darkness. It was as dark can get. And the next thing I know, the floor began to vibrate and move backwards and forwards, trying to knock us off of balance. And I reached out, and I'll never forget feeling the wall. I could feel like it was black, a black wall, just to stabilize me, to hold me up. I'm just a little guy. I've never been in a place like this before. And as we inched our way down this shaking walkway, all of a sudden a cage lit up on my right, and there was a creature inside of it that was screaming and groaning and trying to reach out and grab me. And then it went dark and it was gone. And a few feet or yards down the walkway, there was another beast that the lights came on in a cage to my left. And it was, again, reaching out to try to grab me and get me and to take me away or to eat me or to do something with me that was really scary. And I was holding my grandfather's hand tighter and tighter and tighter. And I said, Grandfather, I don't like this. I really don't like this. And he said, it'll be okay. You'll see as we go down. We went down to one more screen that came up, cage that opened up, and I screamed. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. I was terrified. I said, Grandfather, you have got to get me out of here. I want to get away from this. Get me out of this place. Get me out of this darkness. I do not want to be here. I don't. Grandpa, I'm afraid. I'm really afraid. Shaking. I don't know what's going to happen next. And he said, well, let me pick you up and I will get you out of here. And somehow he made his way to a doorway that he could make out a doorway, and he knocked on it. And an attendant opened the door and took us down a hallway and opened another door. And as I stepped through the doorway, the threshold of that door, there I was in sunlight, away from all of those scary things in that place. I remembered the power of fear in my life, the tyranny of the power of fear that strikes us at the deepest core of our being and prevents us from really living life in the sunlight the way that God wanted us to live in the sunlight. And today I want to talk about the source and the root cause of fear before we talk about how we can overcome it. And I know of no better place to begin to talk about the root cause of fear, where it comes from, the very nature of fear itself, than the story of David in a valley one day with a giant who was causing great fear to his people. As you'll recall, The story of David and Goliath takes place in the Valley of Eli. The Valley of Eli is known for the great Eli trees. They're like giant oak trees that grow there. And it's a very desolate, barren, stark place filled with only rocks and, of course, stones. What was significant about the Valley of Eli is that it was of high strategic importance because it controlled the roadway between the Mediterranean Sea and the hill country of Judea, where the capital of Jerusalem was located. Everyone had to go through the Valley of Eli. So it was the scene of epic battles throughout history. In fact, in 1187 AD, the Muslims sent King Richard the Lion-Hearted home with his tail between his legs from the Crusades. But more interestingly, 2,000 years earlier, it was the scene of an epic battle between the nation of Israel and the nation of the Philistines. The Philistines were camped on the northern ridge, and the Israelites were on the southern ridge, and in between was this great valley. And they had reached a great stalemate. So, there they are in the valley. The giant is issuing this command to the nation of Israel, this challenge. He says to them, "Give me a man. Come on, somebody, come down here and fight me. Is there a man among you, a man of courage and of heart and of passion, who's willing to take on this battle, who's willing to fight me? Give me a man." For 40 days, he issues this challenge 2 times a day, in the morning and the evening. Give me a man. Give me a man. No one takes up the challenge. It's a veritable no man's land, this valley. There's no one in it but a giant. And the giant represents the fears of the people of Israel. You see, everyone knew that the person who was to go fight Goliath was the king, Saul. He stood above the people of Israel. He was 6 feet 6 inches tall. He was their king. But he was afraid. He was humiliated to go and fight the giant. And none of his soldiers either, his great warriors, would take up that challenge of Goliath. They were all terrified of what this giant might do to them. They were living in fear, the kind of fear that I knew when I stepped into Noah's Ark and it was so dark and black, and I didn't know the way out. I mean, that is the tyrannizing power of fear when it invades our lives. Fear gets inside of us, and it takes hold of us. It's where we live in the shadows, in the darkness, in the valleys of our lives. And fear always stops us from becoming or getting to where we want to get to. It's what stands in between us and the good stuff, the freedom, the light, the freshness of life. It terrorizes us. And I imagine this very moment, as some of you are listening to this message, that you understand that fear. There's something that's got you on the run, that you can't get hold of, that you can't overcome, that's bigger than you. It's scary. And it may cause that kind of panic attack, that feeling that life is out of control and I can't get it back. And I don't even know if I can control my mind at this moment, that fear just captures us and takes hold of us and takes us to places where we don't want to go. That's why Churchill said, "Fear makes cowards of us all." It does make cowards of us all. Not because we want to be, not because we're not good people. It's just the tyrannizing power of giants who live in the valleys of our life. Now, it's at this point that the story takes a surprising turn. There is a young shepherd boy living at home whose father asks him to take food to his brothers who are on the front lines of the ridge of the Valley of Eli. And he does so. And when he gets there, he hears this giant 2 times a day issuing this challenge to give me a man. Give me a man. Come on. Somebody come out and fight me. Come on, give me a man. And when this little shepherd boy by the name of David sees this lion, this giant, he just stares in disbelief. He looks around. He sees the army. They're not doing anything. Nobody's moving. The king hasn't done anything at all. And he wonders, how can you call yourself a king? How can you call yourself soldiers? Brothers, how can you call yourself warriors and stand here and put up with this kind of thing? How can you do that? And he is not only humiliating Saul, our king, and he's not only humiliating our warriors and our soldiers, he's humiliating our nation, and not only our nation, but ultimately at the root core of things, he is humiliating God himself, the God that we worship and the God that we love, and he is humiliating him. Now, keep in mind that David is not a soldier. He's not a warrior. He's too young to be a soldier and a warrior. He didn't belong there. He wasn't supposed to be there. He's just a shepherd boy. But he knew something was wrong. He knew that someone was messing with his God. And then he does something absolutely unexpected, crazy. He said, I'll fight the giant. Yeah, I'll fight him. I'll go down into that valley that makes you so afraid, that tyrannizes you with the power of fear. I'll go down in that valley. And I'll go down because I understand the root cause of your fear. At its core, it is ultimately a lack of trust in the very character and the very nature of who God is. David is reaching into a spiritual truth that fear is rooted in a lack of trust in God. Now we all face that. I mean, it's just who we are as human beings, that when we're faced with giants living in the valleys of our darkness, we tend to step back and lose sight and focus on who God is and on his power, and we focus on the giant. We focus on the fear, but not David. When Saul said to him, well, you're just a shepherd boy. I'm a king with great armor. Why would you go down into the valley? David said, well, because I'm a shepherd boy. Shepherds are watchful. They take care of their sheep. They're sacrificial. They lay their lives down for their sheep. I fight lions and bears for a living. I'm a shepherd. I'm a shepherd. And shepherds learn to live on the plus side of fear, on the overcoming side of fear. So David says, I have had to answer the question over and over again, and this is the ultimate question you have to answer. If you want to seek the root cause of fear, he said, I've learned to answer this question over and over again by myself in the dark with my sheep in the fields. And the question is simply this: either God is or God isn't in control. He is either God or he isn't God. This is where David begins to understand that faith always fights fear, so that the ultimate root cause of fear ultimately now is a lack of trust in the character and nature of God and of his ability and promises to take care of us. He says over and over and over again, I take care of the sparrows in the air. I take care of the flowers. I take care of the grass. I'm in charge of the wind and the sea. I can make people walk again. I have the power of resurrection, of new life. Timothy said, for God's not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. And so the root cause of fear is this lack of trust in God. And in our next message, we're going to talk about how to overcome the giants that live in the valleys of our fear.